Picture this. Monday morning, tenants call the front desk. Offices on the 12th floor are stifling. The BAS points at a CO2 sensor fault. The spare bin is empty, and the controller's firmware is 3 versions behind. By noon, the building manager is fielding angry emails, and someone's on a flight to find a discontinued part. Small devices, big consequences. That's the sensor tax we're untangling today. Welcome to Built, Wired, and Secured. I'm Alex Morgan. With me are Michael Harrington and James Rogers to talk practical lifecycle steps, spares, firmware, and who owns what after handoff. Michael, James, thanks for joining.
Glad to be here, Alex. That opening scenario, I've lived that. From an operational standpoint, the first question is always, what breaks if this goes down?
Exactly. And when you don't plan for spares and firmware, preventative work turns into firefighting. Preventative maintenance beats emergency repairs every time, no contest.
Let's start with why this happens. Michael, you called out procurement habits. Walk us through what actually goes wrong during projects.
Most projects optimize for upfront cost and schedule. So procurement picks a single vendor because it's faster, or the lowest cost sensor because it fits CapEx. That sets up a brittle supply chain.
Wait, so that's both a sourcing problem and a documentation problem?
Yes. You get custom configurations that aren't captured, a binder that says as installed, and no clear owner for firmware updates after handoff. That works until it doesn't. Tenants feel it immediately.
And another common slip. Field techs tweak parameters on site to stop a nuisance alarm, and that tweak never goes back into baseline documentation. Later, a firmware push overwrites it, and the system behaves differently. Reliability actually starts with those small human fixes being recorded.
Right. So, undocumented tweaks, single-source spares, and missing firmware governance are the core culprits. Now teams face trade-offs. Vendor-managed firmware looks attractive. Michael, what's risky about giving updates to the OEM?
Vendor-managed reduces owner workload, but introduces dependency. If a vendor's cadence doesn't match your maintenance windows, or they drop support, you're stuck. Typical vendor support windows often run 3 to 5 years, but that varies, so insist on published EOL and support schedules up front.
3 to 5 years. Okay, that's a useful benchmark. James, full owner control costs resources. Test benches, staging, rollback plans. Are small teams just doomed here?
Not doomed, but you have to match the model to capacity. If you insist on owner-managed updates, you need at least basic staging and a cadence for testing. Trust the process, yes, but the process must be doable for your team size.
I'm not sure I buy that every small facilities team can realistically run a full staging bench. Is hybrid realistic? Some vendor support with owner oversight?
Hybrid is very realistic. Negotiate owner-approved maintenance windows, mandatory release notes, and staged rollouts. If the vendor resists transparency, that's a procurement red flag.
And start small. A one-day critical spares kit plus a cheap test bench, literally a shoebox of parts with a controller, lets you validate updates without full lab infrastructure. It's affordable and prevents midnight improvisation.
Let's talk spares, OEM versus generic. James, you've run both approaches at scale. What's your rule of thumb?
Tiered spares work best. Critical sensors get OEM or verified compatible spares. Low-risk items use generic stock. Always validate generic parts on the bench before they go live. Not validation saves you costly surprises.
I've seen the opposite play out. A tech installs a cheaper sensor, and the controller reads the signal differently. Fans ran 24/7. The energy bill jumped about 15% that month, and we logged over 60 hours of overtime fixing it. Short-term savings evaporated into tens of thousands in cost.
Ouch, that's the expensive tail of the sensor tax. Can you give a quick win story? One small change that made a big difference?
Sure. We added 3 OEM spares per critical sensor type. logged every field parameter change in a shared runbook, and scheduled quarterly firmware tests on a bench device. We caught a vendor update in test and rolled back before it hit production. That discipline cut emergency calls by a third in 6 months.
That third reduction is a real metric teams can aim for. It doesn't require wholesale budget changes, just prioritized actions and an owner for each item.
Good. Time for a practical, short checklist listeners can act on this week. Michael, give us 3 immediate moves.
1. Inventory your critical sensors and log spare counts with owners and dates. 2. Write firmware ownership into the O&M or procurement documents, vendor, facilities, or IT. 3. Require vendor EOL and support windows before you sign. Get those published.
I'll add operational steps. Build a tiny staging bench and test firmware before production. Capture field parameter changes in a single shared runbook. And set a firmware review cadence. Quarterly for high-risk systems, semi-annually for lower risk.
One friction point I want to highlight. What if procurement refuses to commit to EOL info? Michael, how hard should teams push?
Push hard. Transparency on updates and EOL is a baseline risk control. If a vendor won't provide that, you have to weigh the lower upfront cost against the operational uncertainty. It's a real trade-off. Don't ignore it.
And remember, you can phase this. Start with the highest impact zones. Server rooms, main AHUs, tenant critical floors. Fix those first and expand as you show wins.
Okay, last practical bit. If listeners want the tools we mentioned, download the one-page checklist and vendor question template at the episode link. Also, submit one lifecycle challenge you're facing, and we may solve it on a future episode. That wraps up this episode of Built, Wired, and Secured. Today, we looked at how small sensors become big problems and why clear ownership, modest spares, and staged firmware practices stop the worst of the sensor tax. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, James. Until next time, make sure the systems you're responsible for are built to last, wired with intention, and secured for the real world.